Welcome to Leading with Curiosity. Command and control leadership is dead. We interview leaders, entrepreneurs, and executive coaches challenging old paradigms and fostering cutting-edge leadership. Here's your host, certified executive coach, Nate Leslie.
In the book, God, I love the chapter about the downhill mountain biker who is in this, I think, a World Cup event and his chain breaks. So all this preparation that has gone into this 3 or 4 minutes of his life and suddenly thrown a curveball like the chain breaking. Let's if we could, let's use that guy as the example here. The difference between output and outcomes. Maya Ricker, Olympic gold medalist and national team co-head coach of Canada snowboarding, says it's thrilling to read the details that break down how Ben Sporer helped my snowboard career in a period when his leadership catapulted the success rate of the Canadian snowboard cross team performances. Reading output instantly ignited my desire to be back at the 2010 Olympic Games. My guest today played a pivotal role in my life. In the late 90s, he was one of my first strength coaches. This was a fun reunion, pure joy interviewing Ben Sporer today. I hope you enjoy it too. You can tell by my emails I've been sending you and Trina, this is really fun for me. It's so good to have you on the show. Our relationship is a bit of a metaphor in itself for this book. If I think back to like the late 90s, you were one of my first ever strength coaches when that was kind of new, to be honest.
It definitely was new at that point.
Yeah, right. And the likes of Jason Keane, Trevor McCall, Mike Funk, all have gone on to do their own thing, build businesses, wildly successful in their own rights. And so, God, you'd show up in your bike shorts and your helmet. Then 25 years later, I see you in your bike shorts and helmet at some bike race that you and my wife were both in. And your book, it's called Output. We're going to talk a lot about the difference between output and outcomes.
Sure.
But I see your journey because I've witnessed it from really far away. In fact, I disappeared for a few decades, and here we are again today. The thousands of high quality outputs that you've created to give you the outcomes that you've achieved. Let's back up a little bit to your PhD, to the work that you've done with Olympians in multiple sports.
Sure.
NHL players, high-level athletes, very academic approach to all this over the years.
To be honest with you, I had a really fantastic mentor. I mentioned him a lot in the book, Dr. Howie Wenger, an incredible man, incredible human. And he really spurred a lot of that curiosity to say, well, why? Or how does this happen? Or what is the reason for that? And I felt at the time, I loved being able to practice with people. So I just wanted to continue to learn. And so I was working continuously throughout my master's and my PhD. I went on to pursue my PhD in Vancouver with Dr. Don McKenzie, who's an incredible mentor as well. Through that time from my master's to my PhD, I had actually started working in Olympic sport. And the reason I went to do the PhD is because after I'd done the master's, I felt there was still more to understand. And I really wanted to dive into one area and really be clear and know how much detail is enough. How much detail is too much? And learn those boundaries about interpreting science at a very deep level, but then also working at the same time and applying that science in a very individual, specific level. And so I found the balance between those two served two sort of needs in myself. The curiosity and thirst for learning tied with the ability to apply. And so and then from that space, I really moved into Olympic sport. I was actually in Olympic sport at the time, but really started to thrive in the Canadian Sport Institutes and doing a lot of work in the Olympic space in Canada.
In the book, God, I love the chapter about the downhill mountain biker who is in this, I think, a World Cup event and his chain breaks. So all this preparation that has gone into this 3 or 4 minutes of his life and suddenly thrown a curveball like the chain breaking. Let's if we could, let's use that guy as the example here. The difference between output and outcomes. Talk about the outputs that went into a guy like that's preparation for that event and how it helped him in that moment of crisis.
Yeah. So first off, years and years of technical and tactical expertise. Like
Yeah.
you don't get to that level until you put in that work. It just doesn't happen overnight. And, we talk a lot about talent, and there's people that are talented in many areas and they have some aspects of talent, but those talents really are things that are refined. They're not sort of just, you don't born, or you aren't born being a World Cup downhill mountain biker.
Yeah.
You may have a good sense of balance, you may have a good anticipation, but those things, those attributes become refined over time. So to the question of, how does he handle that moment? How does he prepare? One of the big things in an athlete like that is the ability to prepare for the output that you're required to deliver on. Now, the output that he's required to is ride his mountain bike downhill really, really fast.
Yeah.
Keep his balance, maintain focus when things are happening, and then be able to respond to things that come up. You can't anticipate a chain. You don't prepare for the chain break. It's a possibility, but you don't prepare for it. If that had happened in the first third of the course, there's no way he would have been able to complete that.
Complete and win. Complete and
and
win.
complete it and win. Yeah, he probably would have been able to complete. Let's okay. Yeah, complete it and win.
Yeah.
But what happened is that where it happened on the course still provided an opportunity for him to stay focused on what he was able to do. His preparation on knowing the course, the insides and outs of the course, the turns, the angles. His preparation on being able to understand his bike and how he has to create speed and where he can lose speed potentially to avoid those situations. His preparation on his tactics on lines might have changed in the moment, but he knew there was either or another opportunity. So it really comes back to the preparation. And one of the things I talk about in the book is this concept of building excess capacity, right? And so, I would classify the chain breaking as, what I refer to in the book as a moderator. One of these unpredictable events that may happen. There's lots of different types of moderators, but you have a profile that you've prepared to deliver on a performance, and then something happens. In a normal person's life, it might be your child's sick and you have to go to do a big presentation at work, right? Your child calls in sick from work and you need to change in what's going on. It's a rapid. How do you adjust?
And so that's a moderator, that thing that's been thrown at you?
Well, no, that's an event, but
Okay,
an event can be a moderator, yes.
Yeah.
So a moderator is anything that will influence the ability of your profile to deliver your output. Right?
Okay.
So heat, altitude, culture, there's a lot of different things that can influence that. Fatigue, recovery, poor nutrition that day, lack of sleep. There's a variety of things that will influence your profile. And they're really, I would call them sort of these short-lived moments. This is an extreme one. It's sort of one of the things that you have no control over that happens, and it may influence the outcome. But at the end of the day, if he actually rode, he didn't win that race, but he finished within, 0.2 seconds of the leader, he still would have delivered an incredibly high performance.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it would have been high performing relative to his, but there would have been a mechanical that happened that he wasn't able to control.
So let's dive into this output outcome thing, because I can feel in your writing your passion for this, and people are high performing, high achieving people are often very results oriented, and you argue just wanting to win is not enough. So that the outcome is winning that race. The outcome is winning the championship. The outcome is revenue in a business or net profit, whatever you're measuring. Let's talk about output.
Yeah, sure. Great. I think it's really important. I'm not anti-outcome. I think that's something really important to state, because outcome is really related to your objectives. And I think that you have to have objectives. You have to have a target of where you're trying to go.
Yeah.
But what I try to emphasize in the book is that you have no control over the outcomes. There's always something that can come into play that's out of your control that can actually change the outcome. And in sport, it's really easy. You run up against a team that's just better than you. They're better prepared than you. You have a bad referee makes a call. You have a chain break. A weather comes in, you have to play in pouring rain in a mud pit, and you just don't have the right setup for it, and things happen. But what you can control always is your output. And you can control your ability to prepare to deliver the output that's required to achieve your objective or your outcome that you want. And so I think that that's often where I see people not being aware of the output that's actually required to achieve their objective. And that's a pretty critical piece. And so whenever I find myself working with clients, athletes, whether they're executives, and I give you a perfect example from an executive lens, is that I have an executive approach me quite often through the cycling world, and it's, was a big boom, started probably 2008-ish. Everybody's getting into cycling, and it's still pretty prevalent out there with executives. But I was working a lot in cycling, and people said, they approached me, said, can you do what you do for cycling for me? I just come back from the Beijing Olympics. We had some great performance with the Canadian cycling team. I said, absolutely, I can. I said, I'm happy to sit down and chat with you. And one of the things that came really clear to me is that people wanted to be this great cyclist. And they would relate it to, I like what you did with X athlete. So can you please do that with me? I said, well, let's talk about that for a second. Like, X athlete is full-time athlete. You also, do you want to be a good cyclist and run your business and be a parent and be a good partner? And so what happens is people often think, or they compare to, this is what the pros do over here. This is what this athlete who won Ironman does all the time. Or this is, this cyclist does this and it's on a podcast. And what they forget, though, is their own personal context. And this is like from an elite athlete's perspective, as well as an executive or an individual's perspective. And so they'll take these pieces that are related to somebody else that they've seen do X, but they forget their personal context. And maybe forget's not the right word. They know their personal context, but sometimes they forget to understand the output that's required is different from what they're looking at than their own personal context.
And that question, if I say yes to this, doing this with Ben to become this elite level recreational cyclist, what am I going to say no to? What outputs can I no longer pay attention to? Possibly, for example, worse partner, more absent parent, business suffers, right? Can't do it all.
And that's why it's really clear. I spend a lot of time with people early on to say, look, if you want to get fast, and I mean, I'll use this as one example. If you want to get fast, I can get you fast probably pretty quick. You're going to put a lot of time. We're going to push you hard, but you may not be able to maintain that. You may not be able to keep that past 6 to 12 weeks. There's some other things that are going to compromise. But if your objective is you really want to be the best cyclist you can be social with your friends on the bike, you want to feel like you're competing in these events of Grand Fondos or whatever they might be, but you have to run your business. You're an owner of a business, you're executive, you work 55 hours a week, you want to coach your kids. That's your objective. Let's not forget those pieces, because what will happen, and this happens regularly, is you will focus on this one piece of your objective. And you will be trying to think that that's the output that's required. But you then have to go to work for 50 hours. You are only going to be able to get 5 hours sleep a night because of you only have so much time during the day because now you're coaching and you're driving your kids back and forth. So you have to be honest about that. And so if you really want to achieve that objective, then we have to be honest about what you're capable of achieving and where you are relative to that. So it all starts with being clear on your objective and then being honest about what's the output that's required to actually deliver on that.
At the start of this, you mentioned something I'm very passionate about, that outcomes are totally out of your control. When you work with high performance athletes, for example, how can that fact of there are things in life that we can't control, plus owning and controlling the outputs, how can that help with resilience, mental health, grit, willing to get back into the next competition, dealing with defeat, dealing with loss, dealing with failure, knowing that you still have your foundation of outputs that you can control? What comes to mind for you?
I think first and foremost is that you actually have to measure your performance based on your output.
Let's say
Okay.
that again. Let's say that
You
again.
absolutely have to measure your performance based on your output. And performance is an act. It's your ability, you execute a variety of tasks to achieve an objective. That's pretty much what a performance is. If you can look it up, there's a variety of different definitions of it. But if we think of an actor, they go on stage, they do a performance. They may not win the best movie, they may not win the best actor award, but they delivered a performance that was unbelievable. It connected with the audience. It was at or above their expectations. But we also see performances from actors where they go out and they act through a thing, and we look at it and we go, yeah, that wasn't their best movie, right?
Mhm.
And we judge their performance based on their performance, not on an outcome. And so when we think about sport, is performance is really what happens in a game between the start of the game and the end of the game. From the start of the race till the end of the race, your performance is your actual output. The outcome, as we talked about, is where that sort of fits in a win reality. And because you can't control the output and the outcome, and there's lots of things to influence that outcome, a referee, better prepared athlete. You happen to be in a sport when there's just this genetic freak that
Yeah,
will
sure.
dominate the sport, like it happens, right? Why how do we tie this back to dealing with that as an athlete? Is that one, first off, we frame and evaluate a performance on what we're trying to achieve, right?
Mhm.
We're framing and evaluating our performance on the output that we're trying to deliver. And when you define your objective and you really clearly articulate the output that's required to achieve your objective, what you're doing is you're preparing yourself to perform at a level that has a bandwidth that's high enough to most likely achieve that objective and narrow enough that if you are actually achieving that, you're delivering that output, you're increasing the likelihood of achieving your objective dramatically.
Right.
Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
It does. It's reminding me of you and I are both in service to other people, and I have a strong feeling that being proud of that work when we go to bed at night and put our head on the pillow and when our feet hit the floor in the morning, regardless of where it goes or the accolades, the act of being in service to people, of that output day after day, of being fully present for our clients to help them get from where they are now to where they want to be. When I measure my own performance based on daily, consistent, ethical, proud outputs, that's all I need.
Yeah. And that goes back to your question. And the next piece I was going to say from an athlete's perspective is that if you are judging your ability as being a high performer as an athlete on whether you win, right?
Mhm.
Or whether you finish third, but your capabilities and your profile, and you've got a family at home and you're going to school as an amateur athlete and
Yeah.
you're X, and your genetic capacity is at a certain level that may not be at the genetic capacity as the others, but you're delivering at that level day in and day out, and you're getting honors roll at school, and that, because those things are part of your objective, they're not separate.
Yeah.
You're a high
Right.
performer, like, and this is an important thing I have discussions with athletes and clients all the time, is that the minute you start thinking, and I got to be really clear, this isn't about settling. Okay, so because that comes up,
Right. Mm-hmm.
it's not
Mm-hmm.
settling for less. It's being honest and clear about what your true objective is. And often we find what we in sport and in personal life is that we absolutely measure, right, our performance based on not just our objective, but external objectives. What do
Mm-hmm.
other people think is success in this,
Mm-hmm.
in our
Mm-hmm.
personal situation? Well, you actually, you rode, would you ride at the Grand Fondo? Oh, I rode 4 hours and 10 minutes. Oh, yeah. You weren't under 4 hours? No, I wasn't. Oh, we were 3:55. Oh, congratulations. That's great for you. My objective is to be able to finish to push myself to a space where I can ride 125 kilometers in 4 hours and 10
Yeah.
minutes. Like
Yeah.
I'm doing all these other things. I'm not training to be there, but I actually challenge myself to be able to fit this in 4 hours and 10 minutes with everything else that I'm doing, and I'm delivering on it.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean I'm settling
And you
because
beat Nate
I,
by 3.5 hours in his Grand Fondo time.
I know, yeah, no, I just think
You
it,
know,
yeah, it's
yeah,
it's
it's
perception,
not settling.
right?
It's almost it's taken me to this place of contentment and actual happiness. When you talk about maybe moderators, you talk about genetic makeup. When we go back to that group of guys we mentioned that you helped train, and then we add in the guys that played in the NHL, like Matt Pettinger and Jesse Fibber, Mike Stutzel, Jamie Pollock. When I looked at my hands compared to their hands, or I held a stick and they held a stick and ripped a puck, I was fortunate enough to play in one of the best leagues outside of the NHL, and it would only take me 5 seconds to realize, oh yeah, I can't do that. And so my measurement of success cannot be that. It needs to be unique into myself, and it's not about what someone else thinks I should have got to, or whatever level I should have played at. So it's not about settling, but it might be about contentment and like inner peace. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I like to use the word honesty. Like
Yeah.
contentment, I think is good too. Inner peace, I think, is good. I like to use the word honesty when I'm speaking with athletes and clients. I think, are you being honest about what your real objective is right now? Are you being
Yeah.
honest to yourself? Like, and and I got to be careful. I need to make sure I mention this. Is that in the book I talk a lot about this. Is that the purpose of the book was to simplify my perspective on the book, right? So
Mhm.
it was accessible to people. It doesn't mean it's simple. It doesn't
Mhm.
mean it's easy. It's simplified in the book.
Mhm.
Um, if you're a high performer and you address it in the way that I think and I discuss it in the book around optimizing your output, preparing your output to do it yourself to deliver the output on demand, that's required to achieve your objective. That's not easy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like
No.
it's hard work. It's
Yeah.
hard work to be, run a business and get up at 5 in the morning to train because that's the only window of time you have to train for your bike race, or to do it to not go out with, to sacrifice a couple of areas because you're choosing this. It doesn't mean you're slacking. It
Yeah.
means you're just very focused and you're aligning your actions with your purpose at the end of the day.
And this measurement of success, I'm thinking right now, and the expression it's another book that's really popular right now. But this idea of also measuring from where you've came. I was lucky enough to be uh, pre-reading your book before its launch on a train from Amsterdam to Hanover in between clients. And here I am decades later after you and I first made those contacts in the 90s. And this sounds poetic, but as I see the European countryside zooming by me, I was reflecting back on all of the things that have happened to both of us over that time and how far we've come. And so while there's, I don't know if this is directly related to this performance idea, but it is to stop and take a minute to look out the window and measure success, how far we've come, not just where we're headed, not just where we haven't gotten to yet. Any thoughts
Correct.
on that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, first, I think I use a sport analogy of this one because I think it's pretty simple. It helps clarify it a little bit. Is that if you say my objective is to win the Olympic Games in discipline or in this sport X, an individual event, and I'm an 18-year-old athlete, and I look at where it currently is, my objective might be realized in 4 to 6 years out,
Yeah.
right? I can't expect to win that now. And
Yeah.
in sport, we actually are really smart about that because I think when we think about Olympic athletes, we do quadrennial planning. We do, each year we build on the prior year. We think, how are we going to get there over these period of, if let's say it's 3 or 4 years that we think it's feasible, we plan that out. We have benchmarks throughout that process, and it might sound really familiar to you if you work in business. It's a standard sort of
Yeah,
approach,
it's not
right?
a metaphor. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think what we do is when we measure our performances, along that way, our outputs, we have to be clear on what the outputs are for each of those stages. Not whether you finish first or whether you finish second, but we're actually pretty good at saying, no, we don't expect you to win right now, or we don't expect you to finish at the top right now, but we expect you to be here by the end of this year or here by the end of next year. And so relative to your time perspective is like, and I actually see this a lot in young practitioners. The young practitioners come in and they want to work in sport, and right away they want to be working at the very top, and they want to have all this experience, and they want to have a massive impact at the very top level. But there's a whole bunch of steps that go through to get to that space. You know, if you've only worked for a year or 2 or 3 years, your experiences, your interactions with people, your ability to read situations is not the same as it is 15 years down the road. And same thing in sport. If you're a 20-year-old athlete coming into a league that's full of veterans that go up to 35, let's say the NHL as an example, the nuances, like,
Yeah.
you read different personalities. How do you deal with certain situations and pressures and stress?
Wisdom is a compilation of thousands and thousands of outputs and experiences,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah, very
You know,
much. Experience is the piece, I think.
yeah, yeah. You know, I wrote down here, like, it's about planning your work and working your plan so that, do I deserve to be disappointed? Have I done what is required? This quadrennial plan, this 4-year plan, have I done the steps required so that I have basically laid it all out there? I mean, this seems to be one of those common sense but not common practice issues. It's a simplified book, but it all makes sense when we talk about it. So how do people get in their own way?
Well, I think it's a big thing. I think one of the things that I just thought of when you were talking there is like, you know, oh, this is my step and this is where I need to be. I've gone through this progressive plan and I'm executing on my plan across the way. Is one of the most important steps that I think gets missed a lot is that first step of being clear about what's actually required and being honest about it. And so I've met many athletes over the last 25 years who know what they want to do. They want to be a professional athlete. They want to be an Olympic champion. But at some different level, they're either, one, not being honest about what's required to do that, or their team around them is not being honest about what's actually required to achieve that from where they are to where they need to be. And or two, they're not being honest about, and when I say what's required, I'm not talking about the output at the end of the day, because I am talking about the output, but what's actually required to prepare yourself to deliver that output. Because if output X is required and then you are here, you may need to be put in the training hours. You may need to make sure that you forcefully recover when your friends might be going out. You may need to make sure that you're taking the time to watch video or film, because you need to understand what's required to actually deliver at that, and you need to prepare yourself to deliver at that. So there's a disconnect between what they think that's required and also what they're willing to actually prepare and where they think they are relative to that. So it seems simple, right? And it is simple. And I mean, and I actually, this is one of the things that, for the book, for me personally, I'll just be vulnerable here for you. But as I wrote the book and I went through the process, I would say I kept struggling with saying it's too simple. It's I'm simplifying it too much. But every time I went back to read it and then articulate and have a few people read it for me, they're like, no, this is exactly what needs to be said. And so sometimes we try to make things a little bit more complicated. And to your question is saying, well, it just seems so common sense. But, you know, when I talk to people about it, they miss these steps. It's not, it may be common sense, but we don't actually
not common practice.
Common practice, great.
Yeah. Forcibly recover. We haven't talked about that yet, and I wanted to say, like, that I told you in the when we first connected, the thing
Yeah, I
that
thought
has,
you'd bring this
you
up.
know where we're going,
Yeah.
that this has stuck with me. So when Ben was our trainer back in the late 90s, there was, the bar was cheap on a Wednesday night. So Wednesday night was when the group was going out, but Thursday was our day off or whatever the day was, right? And he would say, guys, would you please not go out the night before your day off so that your day off is actually a recovery day and not a hangover day? And I've thought of you and failed at that so many times since then. But at 46 years old, I'm starting to listen to you, Ben. So I want to acknowledge that and thank you for it. But
I'm
uh,
glad to
you
hear
know,
that.
yeah, that forcibly recover, to force yourself to recover, force yourself to step away so that you can stay energized is also a really important part of this that can't be missed either.
Yeah, we see it in sport all the time, but we actually see it way more in the business world. We see that the hustle culture, right? People talk about it. It's a badge of honor. I only need 5 hours of sleep. It's
Right.
the first one into the office, the last one out. And I've never been a big believer of that. I believe that's, don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm not saying don't work hard. It's hard work.
No.
I've worked hard my whole life. I work hard at everything I do, but I also believe working smarter is better than working harder. And a good example of that is like working an extra 2 hours that are completely unproductive because you're exhausted versus going to get 2 hours of sleep and coming back the next day, or 2 hours of more additional sleep, or having some downtime mentally to recharge and coming back the next day and being more productive is actually more productive. Now, there's times when you need to push it.
Yeah.
Just like in training, there's times when we need to go deeper to get the response that we want. There's times when you need to induce excessive fatigue so that you get adaptation. Just like in life there are. But what I find is that, and I go back to this, know when those times are, but it's not all the time.
Yeah.
And know when those times are when you need to forcibly recover. And I'll go back to your example because I think it's a really good example. If you got a recovery day built into your training, right? And its purpose is to adapt to the training stresses that you put onto it in 3 or 4 days leading up to that. And then you have a day off, and then the training plan to continue on that progression is going to target and hit you again. Well, if you go in and mess up that recovery day and you turn the screws on it a little bit harder,
Yeah.
and you're not recovered, and now you come back in when you should be more recovered to then put the next adaptations, you don't actually get that increased adaptation because
Mm-hmm.
your efforts in those training sessions are less,
Mm-hmm.
right? You actually get maladaptation over time, and you'll probably get stagnant adaptation, but then if you keep doing that, you'll get maladaptation, so less adaptation.
Yeah.
You'll see performances become less. And so if you're someone that's saying, I only need 4 hours sleep, I only need 5 hours sleep, I will not I will work with an executive or a business person that says, I need 5 hours of sleep, and then say to them, well, no, you have to take 7.5 hours of sleep. That's the magic number. It's not. Like, I think that's stupid. Like, if I was to ever walk into someone's environment and say that, I would be a fool to say that.
Mm-hmm.
But what I would say is maybe try to get an extra half hour here, because all the research on sleep, there's a personal window. All the research on sleep, for the most part, will tell you that sleep extension by up to 15 to 30 minutes improves performance across a variety of different variables. So cognition, decision making, reaction time, up to a certain point. And that point might be 7.5, 8, 9 hours, depending on the person and where they're coming from. But if you're at 5 hours of sleep a night or 4.5 hours of sleep a night, and if I just say, hey, try to get 30 more minutes a day, that's still not a lot of sleep, but you'll see your performances improve. You'll feel more energized. Is it optimal? Maybe not. Maybe the next step is, like, once you've realized that, you're at this space of being able to go, okay, I actually feel I'm getting more done. I'm actually not falling behind. I'm actually more productive. Let's try another 15 minutes, right? Let's take it in these micro doses or micro steps along the way. So that goes back to speak to your aspect of the time, right? The time.
Yeah, yeah. Intentionality. So being honest about what you want and what's realistic and being really intentional. Those are kind of a couple of key takeaway messages for me, and far from oversimplistic, Ben. When I read the book, I just felt your use of story, your ability to be relatable while speaking about Olympic level performances was really profound, and the translation from sport being a metaphor to being exactly the same to anyone trying to achieve certain levels of performance in their own personal lives was there. And it was an honor to read it, an honor to have you as a guest. Where can people find the book and find you?
Book is output-book.com. That's the website for the book. All the links there. It's on Amazon. It's on Indigo. It's on a variety of links across the world. I'm on LinkedIn, just Ben Sporer. On Instagram, it's Output Book, and Twitter, it's Ben Sporer PhD on Twitter. So that's pretty much where you can find me.
We will link
Thanks
to
so much
all
for
of
having
those.
me. It's been amazing. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, my pleasure, Ben. Honor's mine, and we'll have all of that information in the show notes wherever you get your podcasts.
Thanks for listening to Leading with Curiosity. Please share, follow, and rate the show so that other leaders can make positive change in the world. Connect with Nate at nateleslie.ca. And remember, the brain behaves very differently when encouraged to think rather than told to listen.